All right, welcome back. Man, that was a cliffhanger. Tears, fingernails along the
Dun,
floor.
dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. All right, let's get to part 2 where we talk about after we sent him away, what happened next.
Yep. We're going to cover the adoption, the actual adoption part of this story, all of the stuff that went into it before we went and got him, completing the adoption, and we'll just share about some of the things that we went through the adoption process and a little bit of life after the adoption.
Yeah, and stay to the very end. This episode might creep a little bit longer because this was a huge experience for us, but stay to the very end because we have a clip that we're going to share with you that might make you cry.
Enjoy.
All right. Wow, we really left that last episode on a cliffhanger there.
What happened?
What happened?
So we dropped Sebastian off at the
Yeah.
airport. He goes back to Colombia. Our hosting time is done.
Dunzo.
We are no longer his guardians. We are on the adoption process journey now, and
On the adoption train.
Yeah.
And we get to call him in 1 week.
we are in the depths of despair.
Yes,
We are
crying in the shower.
grieving, depressed, working on mountains of paperwork. It's a terrible time. But the bright spot.
Let me just go ahead and say that one of my favorite things in life is filling out forms and doing
Oh
paperwork.
yeah, good times.
The minutia of the details is exactly how this ADHD adult is wired to spend his afternoons and feel like he had a wonderfully productive
Especially when you're
time.
epically depressed. All right. So, but the bright light in all of that is that we get to talk to him, right? Like we
want
were
to talk to him.
that these kids are all going back, but in a week you get to talk to your
Yep.
child. And
Video
so
chat. You can see him.
Hang in there.
Yep, you got this. 6 more days.
So what happens?
So the day of the flight back to Colombia, Colombia changed the law and said that you could only have contact every 4 weeks after hosting. Colombia, come on. You're killing me. Part of it was because I don't even want to get into because it doesn't have anything to do with our family.
It doesn't. And we love
And-
Colombia.
Yeah, we love Colombia. It's just they
that's
just
how it-
decided that they post hosting, because 85% of these kids do end up getting adopted. Half of those by the host family. The majority of the kids who go back, that means the majority, over 50%, are not being adopted by that family that hosted them. But now if they're in constant communication, it kind of can make it challenging for them to then connect and commit to a family that
Right.
does want to move forward with adoption, right? Part of it, but it's one of those things they got to make a law that blankets
Yeah.
and covers everything. And so when you have us who
We're
are
not exempt. We're not special.
exempt, we thought we were special.
And there is usually, so we did things in a non-typical kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Like, so typically a family will host this child.
We did it the
child
Job and
goes
Amanda
back-
way.
Yeah, the child goes back to Colombia. And then there's a mandatory 2-week cooling off period. And during that time, the family that hosted the child kind of has first right of refusal or dibs, or I don't know how to call it.
You have the opportunity to be first in line.
Right.
To put your hand up and say, yes, I definitely want to
Right.
adopt this child.
Right.
But because a lot of people have met your kid that you were hosting through all these events, right? And so hopefully more than one family puts their name forward as we'd be very interested in finding out more information about this kid and this kid and this kid, right?
Right.
And so they'll put in multiple names, multiple families. And so you do have this cooling off period where intentionally they put you in a position where you disconnect from the emotion of the experience,
Right.
and you step back and you're like, okay, but is this a reality that I can commit to forever?
that's
Very
what-
smart. And they do a good job of telling you you're not a bad person if you decide that this isn't the right fit. You are making a bad decision if you move forward out of guilt. You need to have the right reasons. And so they do a good job of prepping you beforehand and then telling you why they're doing this time. And so we thought that, okay, no problem, but we're still be able to talk to them every week. So we told them that. And then nothing, radio silence, right?
Yeah.
So this kid has been dragged away, leaving fingernail lines in the floor.
And we did have a little bit of like communication through some social workers. Like we were connected on WhatsApp through, these social workers. Some of them come up to stay with these kids through that process of hosting, and they stay in our home for some part of the time of that hosting period. And so we become friends with them and we stay connected. And so they were reassuring us like, look, we're talking to him, we're telling him, we're explaining to him all of these details, and
he knows that he understands no kid is left at the end of the summer. No kid stays. They all leave. So that leaving and going back to Colombia isn't a sign that there's going to be no adoption.
Yeah.
So they were helping him.
And when that rule changed, it's like they told them like they didn't make a promise they couldn't keep. Like this is, things have changed and we're sorting it all out. So, but we had to wait 4 weeks, and it was a long 4 weeks. It was really, really hard.
But the good thing about those 4 weeks is that in that time, the cooling off period happened. We had already prepared all the paperwork. I started the adoption paperwork in May and the hosting paperwork. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, there's a lot of duplicates that are worded a little bit differently, so I couldn't just copy and paste, but I could copy and paste some things, right? And so describe your childhood, boom, boom, right? Describe your parenting technique. Copy, paste. Like there were some things. Talk about your home. Talk about how he would fit in the space. Draw a diagram of your house. Where are the exits in the case of an emergency? All that stuff for like the fostering experience, which was what hosting was. We had duplicated over into the adopting experience, so I was able to put some stuff over there. But in adoption, there are 3 different packets happening at the same time. One is connected to applying for the adoption stuff with the government, USCIS, the immigration, all that stuff. One is the home study and the psychological analysis they do of your family, like all that stuff. And then one is the Colombian stuff that you're doing through their government, right? And so the way it's set up is it's kind of like you do one and then you do the next one, and there's lots of hurry up and then wait. Mm-hmm. Hurry up and then wait. Like they're waiting on us until we get it in, and then we're waiting on them to decide to stamp it.
You're also not really told what the next step is or what the next, like you're like, okay, but if I can work on these things that are coming up, like then as soon as they have their stuff, I can.
So I'm a spreadsheet guy.
Yeah.
I'm a spreadsheet guy. So I put it all in spreadsheets with little checklists, right? And so as soon as I was at a pause where I'm waiting, so we've sent something into USCIS, they have to stamp it and give us an immigration number. I'm waiting for that. Okay, I'm going to pivot and work on scheduling and booking the therapist to come to our house and interview us. I'm going to work on the home study. I'm going to fill out some more paperwork for Colombia, right? So I was doing all the stuff in between. I paused when he was here because I wanted to like fully engage. And also I was tired. I've been doing a lot of paperwork. And so I took a little break for the 5-6 weeks that he was here. And then he went home August 3rd back to Colombia. And so I just spent that next month going hardcore on all the paperwork. So by the time we made the call to him, we had gotten past the step where you're then allowed to tell the children. So first we told our kids. So maybe tell them about that experience.
Yeah. So when we got to that stage of the adoption
When
process,
I say our kids, I'm historically going back to in that moment.
Right.
Only 4 were our kids
Our
at that
bio
point.
kids.
Yeah.
So we got to that stage and we were able to tell our biological kids, and
we were smart enough to record it.
Yeah, we did. So we got them all together on our back deck, and we thought we were setting up a surprise and being super vague, but like they caught on pretty quick about
you can hear them in the video.
Yeah. We were like, we're like, you had this little speech prepared.
And also, I had a piece of paper you can see in the video, a little pink piece of paper, and it also said, "Don't cry" on it.
Good call. So you said your little speech and you talked about how, that
we've heard about a
boy
and
he needs a mom and a dad. And then you can hear the kids going like, "It's Sebastian." And so we told them that we are going to be his mom and dad. That we're adopting him.
Immediate cheering.
Yeah.
Jameis jumped up on the couch.
Yeah.
Like, yes!
They were all very emotional. They were all very excited and, not really knowing what to even do with all of their emotions. They're little kids, right? And so, like, I don't even know if they had experienced, like, crying from being happy at that stage in their life, but they're all, just all of us are breaking down and just super emotional. And it was just a really like joyous moment for our family. And then we decided that we're going to take them out to see a movie to celebrate, right? So we're like, let's get in the van. We're going to go see a movie. And so we get in the van, and then I just remember like going to buckle Judah up and just has these tears welling in his eyes. And is it okay if I cry? I just feel like I want to keep crying. And I said, yes, you can keep crying. And he's like, I'm just so happy. And so it was just really beautiful to see the kids just like overwhelmed, overcome with
He was like laugh
joy.
crying.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, I can't stop.
Yeah. It was really beautiful. So that was fun. And we did record that. And then I believe it was the next day.
Yeah. So before he had left, I had asked, what's the process? What are the steps and stages for Sebastian? I want to know what he's going to go through over the next several months, like after we send him back to Colombia. And they said, well, the first thing is you're going to keep working on the paperwork, because they all knew that we were adopting.
And they didn't really give us a timeline, because this can take anywhere from, I mean, we completed it from the time we discovered Sebastian to the time that we were home at Christmas as a forever family. It was 7 months.
Yep, 7
so
months.
So less
total.
time than an entire pregnancy.
Yeah.
From the time that we sent him back to Colombia after the hosting to the time that we went to get him in Colombia, it was 4 months, correct?
Yeah.
So that's a really short amount of time. In retrospect, like it felt like every day felt like a month, every hour felt like a day. It felt like such a long time because we were apart from our child, but it was really a short amount of time. And so for us, because we were very diligent with the paperwork and all of our processes were super streamlined, we were really motivated, things got kind of expedited, right?
Yeah.
For some families who aren't necessarily on top of things, or there are other hurdles, and we'll get into, the other facets of adoption. There's the expense, and there are a lot of things that come into play. And if they can't get stuff together, it could take a lot longer, a year or more, right? Yeah. And so they can't really give you a timeline. Like, this is what's going to happen, and it'll take 1 month, and this is what's going to happen. It'll take 2 weeks.
They can tell you the process. They can't attach
but there's
days
stages,
to it.
right? Yeah. So they kind of told you what the stages were. And so you had an idea, like once it gets to this stage, then that's when they're going to tell him, yay,
yeah,
you're
they
getting
tell
adopted.
you they tell you the stages, they tell you the process, and they tell you at what point he's going to start to find things out. And so they said early on, actually, he'll be moved from the foster home to Bogota, where they'll start putting him through some classes. They'll put him in English classes if you like. But they said, actually, no, what they said is that
he gets removed from his foster
not
home.
First. They said the first thing we can do is, if we want, we can pay for him to take English classes.
Well, no, that was kind of the trick. Like, so.
No, I know, but that's what the first thing you can do, the first step. So the first step you can do is do that. And then what she said was, if you tell me that you want the best English classes in the country, those are in Bogota. And so he'll get moved to Bogota earlier to take those classes. And so if that's something you want to do, just let me know. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we 100% will pay for those ones. She said, okay, so when they're going to move him for language reasons, they're going to tell him you're not getting in any trouble, because when they get pulled out of foster care, it's often because the family has said, okay, we need a break, the foster family. And so what they do is they tell them, when we move you, we're moving you to Bogota so you can take English classes. The reason you're going there is because this is part of an adoption. And so they said at that point, his therapist will talk him through that. One thing we love about Colombia and their process for how they manage and care for these kids is that they're put in therapy right away. And so they're being told truths about themselves and about their opportunity and about who they are really, really early in life, to reinforce how inaccurate and incorrect the things that they've been told and experienced before. So that's super helpful. And then also they have a really strong foster care system. And so a lot of these foster parents are given tools like, hey, structure, bedtime, limit TV access, all this, right? Whether or not they follow or not is up to the family. But in his particular experience, his foster family was amazing. Bedtime at 8 o'clock. If you don't do your homework on time, you don't get to watch the soccer game on the weekend. So consequences. And then a family that had fostered, was fostering 2 to 3 kids at a time. And so there's not just the biological kids in the home, there's these foster kids. And so there's a sense of community, and there's just a really stable environment, right?
Yeah.
And so he had great access to therapy early on, and then he had a great foster house that he was in. They were never going to adopt. That wasn't an option. And so it was either he finds a place before he turns 16, or he's out on his own at 16 with support. But a lot of these kids don't use the support that's available to them because they're only 16. So I was like, instead of the therapist asking or telling him, what would it be possible for us to talk to him and us to tell him, right? And so we sent a recorded video. They played a little trick on him. They asked him, they said, what do they say? Because he had said he learned English. Very confident boy. I think he'd learned about 11 words. 11 years old, 11 words. So they're like, can you translate for us what this family said? Because we sent him a little video because it had been so long since we got to talk to him. And he was like, I didn't say I learned all the English words. I just learned some of them, right? So they're like, okay, well, we'll call in a translator. And so he thought they were calling his chaperone that had come up with him to translate it. But we had set it all up so that they were recording him in Colombia, and then we had a recording set up of us calling him. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so we thought that it would be fun to record this exchange or this experience, this conversation for our memories, like for ourselves. And also all of our family lives out of state. And so we thought, to bring them into this and to have them be part of this experience, let's record it, make like just a fun family video to share with our family. Yeah. So we called up Sebastian and we had this idea of holding up these signs. And we had in Spanish, father, mother, sister, brother on the signs. And we thought we're going to present him with this question and we're going to say, would you like to be part of our family? But before we do, we're going to hold up these signs and say, I want to be your father, your mother, your sister.
Well, when he hops on, I was like, we all said, hi, Sebastian. And he
right away
thought
he heard
it was the chaperone.
No, he heard our voices.
And he heard our voices.
And
he was like,
he recognized. He's like, oh.
And so I told him in Spanish, I said, tenemos una pregunta. We have a question.
Right. And we kind of messed it up because the whole point of the signs was so that he could read it in Spanish and we would say it in English.
But I'd started speaking in Spanish, so I just kept speaking in Spanish.
Then we all did.
Yeah. So queremos ser tú. We want to be your, and then each kid went up with a sign and said hermano, hermano, hermana. And then he was kind of like figuring it out and smiling. And then when you went up and said, you had a sign that said mama.
And then he started crying.
And then I said papa. And then I asked him.
Well, before you could say papa, one of our kids
ruined
it for you.
Yeah, jumped in and said papa for me.
So,
but I said, queremos saber si quieres ser parte de nuestra familia. We want to know if you want to be a part of our family. And he was just like nodding his head. He was like, see. So it was a really, really cool moment.
It was super special.
Super special moment. Really was at a time where it was like so much paperwork.
Yeah.
It was a really cool like little boost of energy.
Totally.
Because that was September. And so it was like an energy burst. It like now all of us know what's happening.
Yeah.
And now it's just time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what were you going to say?
Yeah. So we had this little video and neither of us are professional video editors, but you like put it, I don't even know what you used. Like you put it into something.
I just did like iMovie and I made a little movie for our family.
Yeah.
So it just flowed.
And it was too big of a file to email
it was like over 3 minutes
or whatever.
I tried to put it on Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
But it was over 3 minutes, and so it said it was too long. So
you made a YouTube channel.
Created a YouTube channel, put it on there, and I thought I made it private, but I actually made it unlisted. I didn't know the difference,
right.
So I made it unlisted. And then I just sent the link to our family,
right.
And they could all see it, see the little video.
So they all watched it.
Yep.
And
they're like, oh, cool.
Somebody else watched it because it was accessible. We didn't realize. And this guy, Daniel, he's in the UK. He reached out to us, and this was like within days of it going up, right? It was very shortly after. And he was like, hey, so what did he say to you?
He said, hey, my friend and I are starting this new company. We've been working for a company that does little videos, figures out the algorithm, gets videos to go viral, makes money off of it. But he's like, we don't want to do like cat videos anymore. We want to do super encouraging videos. And we'd like to really launch our company with the video we found of your family.
Yeah, he said like, this is a really interesting situation. It's not typical, right? Like most people don't adopt out of birth order. Most people adopting an older child don't already have a bunch of little kids. Your family is showing
different version of older child adoption than what people picture. Yeah.
We were like, like what's the harm in that? Like, go ahead, take it and do what you will. So he took the footage, he edited it professionally, and then he put it up on his Facebook
Well, first
page.
he asked if we could use it. And I said like, well, we need documentation that says we're not making any money on this video because it's an adoption video and it could jeopardize the adoption. And so we signed all the paperwork, and he said he wanted to create a company that encouraged people, and he felt this video was like the foundation of that. And their company is called Happily. So He recreated the video, sent it to me, and I just said we wanted to have rights to use the video, re-edited the video, put different music to it, and then license it out everywhere, like let people use it as well. And so then you got the first call.
Well, yeah, I got a call from a relative in another country, and they were like, hey, we just saw your family on the news. And I was like, what? And I mean, I wasn't paying attention to the video and what it was doing. And they were like, yeah, I just saw your adoption story, right? Like asking Sebastian to be part of your family on the news. And I was like, and this was I can't remember if it was my cousin in Germany.
It was Germany.
Okay. So it was my cousin in Germany. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't even know what that means. And
this is within like less than a week of it getting reposted.
So I go look at the video and I was like, I think at that point it had like,
I think 300,000 views.
Yeah, like less than 500,000, but more than 100,000. And I was like, what is viral? So I'm Googling, what is viral? How many views does it take to go viral? What, and so then like.
And I was like, we can call it viral. At 300,000, we can say it went viral. That's ridiculous.
So then we started watching the video and the views go up and up and up. And it literally, like by the hour, and it was like
hundreds of thousands of views.
Hundreds of thousands. And then it went to millions. Multiple millions, 50 million, 100 million. Like it just exploded.
Yeah.
And we were just like, oh my gosh, like what just happened? And we started getting friend requests. Like people were finding us on Facebook. And this guy is like, he wants to be friends with everybody who he ever meets. And he's like, accept. And I was like, whoa, calm down. We need to take a big step back here. Like we don't know any of these people. And so
just the way you said that just shows your personality.
We
don't know these people.
Well, I was being cautious, okay? Like protective mama bear. And so we created a family Facebook page, which is still kicking.
Yep.
So you can check us out on our family Facebook page and started connecting with people on there, watching the video continue to go viral, more and more views, millions and millions and millions of views. I think the last time that we checked on Facebook alone, it had like 200 million views. We started getting calls from like Inside Edition, People magazine picked it up. Like it was just, it exploded. It was everywhere. It was on news channels all over the world, news channels here in LA were calling us.
In-flight magazines, on airlines.
We got a call from the Ellen Show, all kinds of stuff. And so that was all exciting, but we're kind of in a precarious position because when you're hosting these children, you're their like foster parents, you're their guardians, right? And you're also advocating for them. And so
you sign paperwork saying you'll post their story everywhere.
Right. It's like, it's your obligation to be the advocate for this child. And so you're supposed to like post about them. You have all the rights to their like image, all that kind of stuff. Then you send them back. And even though we were in the process of adopting, we weren't his guardians. We didn't have those rights anymore. And so we were like...
But the rules hadn't changed. Things are different now today, even than they were back then. But it was like, we didn't have to go back and take anything down. Right. And this was just a story of when he was here. So we were fine posting it all. Yeah. But it still got into like having to prove that we weren't making money off of it. Like it just got a little complicated.
Sketchy. Yeah. And
it wasn't sketchy. It just got complicated.
Nothing sketchy was happening. It just looked like the optics of it.
It just got complicated.
Yeah, exactly. So, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So there was really nothing we could do.
We had to explain it to a few people that were like, why don't you just take it down? I'm like, it's on.
That's not
it's
how
on the
it
Daily
works.
Mail. It's everywhere. People Magazine did an article on it. Like you actually said that exact phrase. You were like, you can't put toothpaste back into the tube.
Right.
That's not possible. That's not how the internet works.
Yeah.
And you said once it was put out there and you guys said it was okay, where it went was no longer under our control.
Right.
And so people understood that it was an opportunity to kind of showcase older child adoption in a way that would put it in a good light, in a way where, the reactions were cute. There were a bunch of little kids involved that were all cute. It just presented what they were hoping people would understand can be the older child adoption experience. And so everybody wanted it to get out there, including the people in Colombia. The government was all about it. They loved the video. It was really cool. I got to meet with government officials. It was really cool.
Well,
but there was kind of like this, like, did it get out there too much?
Right.
It got so big.
Yeah. Nothing like this had ever happened before.
Right. So the first site was that hit 95 and then 100 million, like super quickly. Mm-hmm. And then all the other spaces combined for another 100 million. So it was 200 million total just on Facebook. And then you add in all the other places. So then it got bonkers.
Yeah, it did. So that was interesting and definitely not something that we had anticipated experiencing. But the really cool thing about that, and we could have handled that in a myriad of different ways, right? Like, and it was a little bit scary, kind of like, at certain points I was like, ooh.
Not for me, who wants to be friends with every person I meet.
But it was just...
Like I said, when you were like, we don't know these people, I was like, yeah, we don't know these people.
It felt like a lot. You're putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And we did get, honestly, like...
There are a lot of trolls.
Yeah, there were some pushback. There were some Karens who had interesting opinions that, were not valid. And so there were times where it was like, like, should we be doing this? Like not adopting Sebastian, but should we be putting ourselves out there like that? Right? Like it just kind of felt like a lot sometimes. But the beautiful thing about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is that it can create opportunities or open doors to experiences that you never anticipated or dreamed of. And for us, that looked like us having a platform to advocate for older child adoption while we were going through it, and like bring people into our tribe and show people a different version of older child adoption and kind of help people see like, look, if we can do it, you could do it too. A family ended up reaching out to us and they told us like, look, their family in Thousand Oaks in California, and their family makeup looks similar to ours. They had some little kids and they thought like, if the Barkeys can do it, we can do it too. And they ended up adopting an older boy and I was successful. And that's not the only story that we've heard like that. But if, I remember us talking about it when all of the craziness was happening. And we were like, if this helps get one more older child adopted, it's all worth it, right? Putting ourselves out there and taking the flack and everything that comes with it, it's all worth it. And so that happened, and that was really cool. And then, since then, we've been able to speak at galas and events and really advocate in a public way using our platform for older child adoption, which is not what we went into this for at all, right? So that's been a really cool part of all of this. I think so. So we continued working on with the paperwork and, getting to the point where, there were just like final steps throughout the fall. And we went to Canada for American Thanksgiving, oddly enough. Your sister was having a baby. And so we went there for the birth. And while we were up there, we got the call that we could come to Colombia and pick up Sebastian. So we did a quick turnaround. I remember we flew back home to Southern California. We flew into John Wayne, which is like 20 minutes from our house, drove home, threw the load of laundry in, had a good night's sleep, and then got up the next morning and drove back to John Wayne and flew to Colombia. So we were home like less than 24 hours and kind of felt like the Amazing Race. And then we flew to Colombia to go get our boy. So why don't you talk about what that was like?
Well, that was interesting. We were a very recognizable family in Colombia.
And he didn't know. He didn't know the video had gone viral.
Well, of course not. Yeah, of course he didn't. He had no idea. So we get down there and, we're a recognizable family because there's 6 of us and there were 4 little kids and 2 of them had white blonde hair.
Right.
The other ones had like sandy blonde hair and then white blonde hair and light blue eyes walking around in Colombia.
We're going to stick out in a South American country.
Yeah. So there's a video that's gone viral about us. It went viral in Colombia as well as many other places. But so people recognize us right away, right? So we land the first day, they come and meet with you, give you an itinerary, and then the second day you pick up your child and you spend the rest of the time together in country.
So we went to the group home where he was sent to out of his foster care home. You get sent to this like boys and girls group home to prepare
in
you
Bogota.
for the adoption. So then that's where we went. It's called Encuentro. We went and we met him there.
One thing that was really cool that was actually the intention of going through the whole other process was that when you do that meetup, the encuentro, which translates as the meeting, you stand in a room, they bring the kid downstairs, then the kid walks into the room and they're like, here's your family. And it's the first time you meet. Except for us, it was a reunion. So it makes for a very different experience.
Yeah.
it was cool. Inside Edition covered that as well. So we have some cool clips and footage from that meetup. But when they brought him in, he wasn't coming into this awkward, here are your new siblings, here's your new parents. He was coming in seeing his friends and his new parents, friends and siblings and new parents.
It was like, we're finally back
together.
We're
finally together. Instead of like, oh boy, I hope this works. It was like, finally. And so then we had talked about whether or not we were going to tell him about the video, but we get in the vehicle and then we go to a restaurant and we get out of the vehicle. And as we're getting out, there's somebody standing there with a camera with his phone and he's behind a bush and he's recording us. And Sebastian's like, what is that guy doing? I was like, oh, well, we have something to tell you. So we go in and we sit down and I'm like, you remember how they were recording you when we asked you if you wanted to join our family? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, we made a little video about it to share with our family, but some people saw it and they asked if they could use it, and it's gotten a lot of views. A lot of people watched the video. And I said, how many people do you think have watched the video? And he was like 1,000 people? And I was like, more. He's like, 10,000. I was like, more. And he was like, not 1 million. I said, no, not 1 million, 76 million. He was like, what? That was 76 million on the one original site that ended up hitting 100. And so then he started looking around at everybody. He's like, does everybody know who I am? I'm like, well, people probably recognize who you are. But then I started explaining, I'm like, this is like 15 minutes of fame, man. Like this is gonna die off pretty quickly. So enjoy it while it's happening.
He's like, are we famous?
Yeah, are we famous
celebrities?
now?
I'm like, no.
People just recognize this from a show they
for
saw.
A minute. Yes.
Yeah. So the cool thing was like we'd be in traffic. Police officer pulled up beside us on his motorcycle, looked in the vehicle, saw us, looked at all of us, and then started waving, asked us to roll the window down. And then people were super nice. And they would ask us first, is it okay if I say hi to your son real quick? And then they would turn and they'd be like, Sebastian, I'm so happy for you. And he was just like smiling. And then somebody from a TV show saw us at
It was like Colombia's version of Survivor. She had won their Survivor. And we were at this like tourist attraction and she was at it as well. And so she recognized us.
And he recognized her.
Yeah.
Sebastian recognized her
like,
from TV.
She was starstruck by Sebastian. And so that was cool for him. Like to be like, oh. So
and then we went out for pizza and a family came over and they introduced themselves to us, said they'd watched our video. And so just everywhere we went, people recognized us. So I told them like, this is very short-lived. This is not going to happen long-term. When we leave Colombia, you're going to go back to California where you remember every little kid looks like your siblings or like you, one of the two. And so I said, so we're not going to stand out. And so soak it up. And then we get back to North America. He and I went to catch a flight to go. I was going to introduce him to a bunch of family in Canada. So we go to the airport. And as we're getting checked in, we've been back for like 2 weeks. As we're getting checked in, the lady, she said to me, looks at me, she goes, I know who you are. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, my daughter will be so mad if I don't say hi to your son. Is it okay if I just say hi to him really quickly? And I was like, yeah, no problem. And so he was like, he was on cloud 9. We were walking away and he was like, you said no one would recognize me. And he's like, everyone here knows me. I'm a star. I was like, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
And so that was really fun for him. That was we made it into a really fun experience. And then one thing I like that we did, this same YouTube channel, we repurposed because earlier we used it years ago to track the first couple years and just post stuff. During COVID, we had a lot of time on our hands. And so
we kind of, COVID happened and we kind of were like, well, like we have a little bit of a following, like maybe we should be one of those YouTube families.
Well, we're like, let's at least just document. Most of what we've done online, we do it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when people are like, what's your goal for this podcast? I'm like, we just want to put down somewhere like some recordings of mom and dad hanging out, talking about life.
Talking about stuff we're interested or stuff that
so that our kids have
resonates with
access
us.
to this when we're gone.
Right.
And maybe we're still here. They control us with it in the future.
And that's kind of what we did with those videos. Like we were like, let's just document this because it's like such a interesting time and like we'll want to have like these memories.
And so our goal was to document the integration and the first bits of everything, right? And so once we got done doing that and we had kind of done the things, that's when we just stopped making the videos. We're like,
well, also it was like you tried editing them, I tried editing them, we hired someone to edit. It was like nothing was really working. And then
it was just too much work
and our kids started to become teenagers and then they didn't want to be on camera. And it's like,
we stopped way before they were teenagers, but they were still in the preteen, surly.
No, Sebastian was a teenager.
Was he when we stopped?
Yep.
That was another thing too, is that he looked way younger than his age.
Right.
He looked about 8.
Right.
Which we were prepared for because we have a lot of adoption in our family, and one of my cousins had told us that they had adopted a 12-year-old who looked 8, and then when she turned 14, she looked 14. So she covered 6 years of biological change in 2 years.
That was interesting, and we read that in that book too, right? Like the connected child, and that's because when a child doesn't have the nutrition, the care, the love, the nurturing, all that stuff, it stunts their growth, right? Yeah. And so we were like, we knew that, he was 11 when we adopted him. He was about the same size of our 7 and 8-year-old. So, and they've always kind of been, they always play catch up with each other. Right now they're all the same size, and they're 14, 15, and 17.
I think the 15 and 17-year-old are freaking out a little bit that the 14-year-old is going to be the biggest.
Right.
Yeah. He is the same size as them now.
But yeah, so he was 11 when we adopted him, and he was the size of about an 8-year-old. And we had heard that stuff from your cousin, and we read it in the book, and we were like, it's not going to happen to us. Well, it did. And he came home. He was 11 years old, turned 12. And between, I would say, the ages of like 12 and 14, like it was like a 2-year period. It was just like he was changing and growing so rapidly, like his body was changing. He was growing out of clothes, out of shoes. It was like every other week. It's like he needs a new pair of shoes. They don't fit him anymore.
We would turn around and all of a sudden his pants were like, they'd be like 5 inches up off his ankle. We're like, we just bought those. Did we not size them right when we got them? And he's like, no, I've had these for 6 weeks.
Right.
We're like, oh my gosh.
So that was really interesting. But let's rewind back to being in Colombia. So we were in Colombia. You get there, you do encuentro, you meet your child. That's the meeting. And then you leave that home, the group home, and he's in your care.
Yeah.
And then it's like all of these hoops to jump through. There are doctor's visits and
visa,
lawyer visits and immigration stuff and all these different appointments. And so we worked with kids and we worked with Nightlight, and they set us up with some in-country support.
So KidSave was the hosting program. It's completely separate from the adoption program.
Right.
And they have to be.
Right.
KidSave is working only on the short-term visitor visa and the foster experience. It's a foster organization. If they were confused with an adoption organization, it would impact how easily they could get the short-term visas, because then people would start to be accused of like, well, you're actually bringing them here for a different reason. So that's very separate, but they work together.
Right.
And so Nightlight Christian Adoptions is who we adopted through. We are Christians, but the organization works with everyone and every kind of adoption you could think of.
They're inclusive.
They're all inclusive, and they're just working super hard to help kids find families no matter what that looks like. And so super cool to be connected with them and to be able to go to events still.
We love and support both organizations. So we're in country. We have this support team that's helping us setting up appointments. We have a driver. It almost felt like we were on the Amazing Race. Like there were all these things we had to get done, and we were there in December. And so we got to experience a lot of the really cool cultural Colombian Christmas time things that were happening. That was really fun and special. We were staying in an apartment. And so we were just kind of doing like regular life stuff, like grocery shopping and cooking and going to see kind of like touristy stuff, but then also working on jumping through all the hoops and getting all that stuff in order. So we really were trying to get everything done so that we could be home for Christmas. So I think that's why like it felt like we were kind of in a pressure cooker, right? And so it was fun and it was stressful, but we were in the country for about a month and we completed all of our requirements. And I think it was December 20th.
Yeah, we're actually there for 16 days.
Oh, okay.
We were way faster than
I thought it was
typical.
about a month.
No, because we told them we had family flying into California with the hopes of seeing Sebastian for Christmas. No guarantees. So they were flying. They're all at our house, hoping we were going to finish on time. And so we had to be done by the 21st or 22nd, or it was going to get punted 2 weeks.
Right.
And so...
Okay, that's where it was fuzzy because we could have been there for over a month because of the holidays, right? All the government buildings were shut down for a couple of weeks, and then it would have just extended our time.
So we got the visa the second to last day possible,
right
before the break.
Yeah.
It was stressful because everybody was sitting at our house waiting for us to come back and hoping.
Yeah.
So that's why we were sprinting around and doubling up, doing 2 things in a day that normally they do one thing. So yeah, it was fun.
And so I want you to talk a little bit about traveling home. So there was a special moment when we were coming home. We're all relieved and excited and happy. And at the same time, we're noticing Sebastian having these conflicting emotions.
Yep.
We're at the airport, we're on our way home, and the kids were really excited to like fly on an airplane, and they're all walking, getting their snacks and walking around and feeling like on top of the world. But Sebastian was sort of like,
especially once we were on the
conflicting
plane.
Emotions. Yeah. So we get on the plane, and then what happened?
Well, remember when we were going to drop him off at the airport, I already talked about a brave boy being able to, if a brave man can cry in front of people without being embarrassed, then a brave boy can as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we already kind of talked through our philosophy and thoughts around emotions and crying and how, kids are allowed to cry. And so
just processing feelings, feeling all the feelings.
Yeah, feel the feelings.
That.
He already knew that within our family that was
acceptable,
right? So we'd already kind of covered that. But so I told him, I just want you to know that we are going to come back to Colombia. We will come back here. It is true that it's not going to be as soon as you or we wish it could be, but we will come back. And I said to him, one of the things I want you to know is that there's something really beautiful about being humans. And that's that we can actually experience 2 emotions at the exact same time. And so I told him that when I was in my early 20s, a close friend of mine passed away when I was in college. And I remember being at his parents' family home just a few days after he'd passed away and laughing so hard. We were telling Mark stories. We were all having a laugh. We were watching home videos and stuff. And so no part of us was less sad at having lost our friend, but we were also in that moment laughing as hard as we've ever laughed, right? And so we were experiencing 2 seemingly opposite emotions at the exact same time, right? We were mourning a loss and just deeply, deeply sad. And then we were also laughing about memories. And so I said to him, it's a really cool thing about humans is that we can have 2 seemingly conflicting emotions at the same time. And so I said, it is okay for you to be leaving Colombia and to be mourning the loss of everything you've known. It is okay for you to fully feel that in front of us and around us. It is okay to be sad. It's okay to look out the window as we're taking off and feel really like a lot of emotions without us reading into that you don't want to be in our family. It's okay for you to do that because we believe that you can be super excited about what's coming and about this new life and this new reality, and also be really sad about losing the parts of your childhood up till now that you really love.
It doesn't make you any less happy,
and
it doesn't take away from our happiness.
Right. And so I said, you can be fully mourning a loss and also be really happy about something you're gaining as well. And that's something that we've talked about a lot with adoption, where people are like, oh, you're so blessed. It must be such a blessing. It is a blessing, but it is at very minimum, at least equal parts trauma.
Right.
And so, a child that is being adopted is experiencing the finality of losing everything that they should have been able to expect, request, demand from their biological family.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is trauma associated with the finality of like, that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you're experiencing a blessing of getting a family, right? And so
it's also traumatic for the family who's adopting. And it's not just adoption specific. Like if you think about adding another family member to your family, whether it's through marriage or through birth or through adoption, it changes things.
Yeah.
It changes the dynamic. It changes everything. In this specific situation, we're adding another culture to our family. We're adding another human. And
another language.
Yeah.
Doesn't
totally.
speak any English.
Like there were a lot of things to work through, and that's traumatic. So I think just recognizing for all of us that it's okay to feel all of those emotions at the same time, embrace them all and feel them all, and then work through that.
Let's talk quickly about our firstborn.
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
So we'll talk about birth order just quickly. We could talk a lot about it, but we had a friend who was closely connected to an organization that does really large grants, $25,000 grants, which would have covered half of the adoption. One of the things I do want to sidebar and say is people would be like, oh man, why are these kids so expensive? The kids aren't expensive.
Or they ask, how much does your adoption cost? How much does it cost you?
Well, not even I'm fine with that. The adoption costing, that's just That's just math.
Okay,
I'm talking
maybe
about.
they'd say, how much did he cost?
That's what I said. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm talking about when they say like, oh man, he's so expensive.
Right.
He's not expensive. He's free. It's the lawyers, it's the therapist, it's the food he's been eating while he's been in care. It's all these things that cost
priceless.
money. He's priceless. Yeah. He costs us nothing, but he's priceless. And so we kept bringing that perspective to people and saying like, no, you're not understanding the situation. Like there's his whole experience, which has to get paid for. Someone's got to pay for the visa, the doctor's appointments, all this stuff. But then there's also all the children who aren't getting adopted that still need care. And so a lot of the money that we're putting in, it's going to these different agencies that are responsible for caring for all of the children that are in the system, right?
And one thing that you say often that I think is really important is that everybody should participate in adoption. So talk about that.
So, yeah, I do think that it is all of our responsibility to participate in adoption. I think for a small minority of us, that means changing your family structure, bringing a child into your family forever. But participating in adoption, May long weekend in 2008, I did something like 18 consecutive hours of paperwork. If somebody had come to the house with a cup of Starbucks macchiato, grande, hot, handed it to me and said, you need a walk. You need to go for a walk. You need some outside air. You need a break. And take it and a hug and taking me out for a walk, that would have been participating in our adoption. We had a friend that reached out to us that said, hey, I always thought that I was going to adopt. We had twins and it was a hard pregnancy. There was a lot of challenges. And, I believe both the husband and the wife, this is what he said, and I agree, both have to be 100% on board or you shouldn't move forward. You're going to put a child into a less than ideal situation if both parents aren't 100% all in. So for us, we're not in that place right now. Would it negatively impact our friendship if we gave you guys $4,000 towards your adoption? And I was like, no, it will definitely not negatively impact our relationship. Thank you so much. So we had the experience of people coming along and giving directly towards helping us pay for some of the fees. We had people come along and pray for us. We had people come along and participate in fundraisers for us. We had people come along and just encourage and just say like, hey, could I come by and just bring you guys a dinner? All of those are ways to participate in adoption. And so I just want to make it super clear that when I say that it is a responsibility of the entire community to participate in adoption, that doesn't mean that every person in the community is bringing a child into their home as a forever part of their family. It means that we're all finding ways to participate in caring for widows and orphans. That is something that you and I both believe very strongly. And so for us, that experience came along where that was our opportunity and we felt like we were supposed to be one of those families and we did. But one of the things we had to navigate was adopting out of birth order and also all the finances. And so we had a connection through a close friend to this organization and he had recommended one other person, one other family, and they had gotten it. So he was like,
you're a shoo-in,
right? So we did all the steps and then they found out that we were adopting out of birth order.
Which is a theory from over 100 years ago.
I'll get to that. So then they wrote back and they said, it is our policy. We believe that when you adopt out of birth order that you do significant damage to the existing family structure. And so we have chosen not to support adoptions out of birth order. So we will actually not be moving forward with awarding the grant. And I was like, so I wrote back an email and I said, I have a BA in psychology. I actually studied that theory. It's from the early 1900s and it's just a theory. And I said, I would present the contrasting thought that maybe it has nothing to do with the order that a child enters the family, and maybe it has everything to do with how we parent differently, depending on whether it's our first kid or our second, third, fourth, fifth kid. We parent differently. And I said, I don't think there's anybody that would claim that they parent their fourth kid the same way they parented their second kid or their first kid or their fifth kid or their third kid. There's similarities.
You're a different person when
There's
you're
similarities.
parenting those children.
Yeah, I would say like at your core, you're still the same person, but hopefully you're a person who's committed to growth in every area, which includes parenting. And so
you're in a different season
know
of
better,
life.
do better, right?
Absolutely.
And you have to learn management techniques, leadership techniques, like how to run this organization of the family. And so you do start to parent differently, and you're almost forced to stop sweating some of the small stuff. And so that is a different experience for the child. The child is raised differently. And so is the firstborn turning out this way because they were born first, or are they turning out this way because you parented a specific way that way? And if you can claim some ownership of how that experience changes for the children depending on when they're born, then you can also participate in making sure that you level that playing field out and that you take away some of those negative things if you're really intentional, right? And so for us, we're like, let's get really intentional about addressing the areas that can become challenges and become harder experiences for the kids as the birth order is disrupted. So specifically, when you're adopting a new oldest child, the previous oldest child is the most displaced, right? Second oldest now goes to third, not a big difference. He was already a middle child. The third is now fourth, but still kind of middle child thing. The fifth one's still the baby. The youngest is still the baby. It's the oldest, and then you're bringing a new oldest. So what we did is we sat down. Well, first, we immediately changed our vocabulary and our language. We immediately shifted and started referring to our oldest as our firstborn. And so we'd introduce, I mean, an obnoxious amount of times. We're like, this is our firstborn. This is our firstborn. Everybody met our firstborn. This is our firstborn Asher. We were saying it over and over again to replace the language of oldest with firstborn.
And I correct people. I've always corrected people since then, and even to this day. They'll say, oh, is he your oldest? And I'll say, this is my firstborn. And so I think that was a really important shift. And
it kept his spot. That's never taken away. Also, the rainbow baby, where you mentioned
so
we
in
had
our
lost.
our last episode, I talked about how I had suffered pregnancy loss and miscarriages. And so Asher has always known that he's our rainbow baby. That's his special title.
What is a rainbow baby?
A rainbow baby is a baby that you have after miscarriage, after pregnancy loss, and like the rainbow after the storm, right? Yep. And so he's always had that special title.
He's been proud of it.
He's super proud. And so I think maybe that had something to do with him accepting this firstborn title, because he knows he is the rainbow baby.
He's also not super emotional. He's a thinker. And so he kind of weighs things out. When I say emotional, he doesn't have big emotional reactions to things, right? So he thinks it through. And so when we sat him down and we said like, hey, this is changing. He's logical. We said, this is changing some things, right? You're always going to be the firstborn and you're always going to be our rainbow baby, but you're not going to be our oldest. So there's going to be a firstborn and an oldest, kind of two different positions, but you're no longer the oldest. And so we asked him, how do you feel about that? So he took a deep breath and he kind of was thinking, he's like 8 years old. He's like, well, to be honest, it's been a lot of work taking care of the other three and I could use some help. And so we just burst out laughing. We were like, okay. So that was his honest, full explanation of how he was feeling and his experience on it. He's like, yep, more help. Great.
Right.
And
super logical.
Of our 5 children, Sebastian, our oldest, and Asher, our firstborn, are the 2 introverts. And the other 3 are like over the top extroverts, right? And so in different situations, we have different pairings, different pairing offs, right? And different ones like doing different things with different ones. Like our third and our oldest both play lacrosse at the school. They have that in common. Our oldest and our firstborn are both introverted. So they're the ones that are like, nah, we're good staying at home. And the other 3 want to go to Target for no reason. They just want to get out of the house.
They all play off of each other differently. Yeah.
They have different relationships. And then the younger 2 often pair off. They act a lot like twins, the youngest 2. But then also the youngest and then the oldest have a really tight relationship. They clown around all the time together. They have a really tight relationship. So they all kind of form their own dynamic between themselves and their newest sibling, right? And so they all have kind of a different relationship. Sebastian's very much a nurturing, caring older brother. I remember early on, we were walking down the road and he like grabbed Jameis and moved him to the inside of the sidewalk because he was like, no.
Or he'd carry him on his back, remember?
Well, I'm just talking about like, so in Peru where I grew up, the man or the older sibling always walks on the outside of the sidewalk and the woman or the child on the inside. Sure. And so Jameis was walking confidently along the outside of the sidewalk. He was like, no, moves him to the inside because he's the older protector. Even though he was tiny, he was like, I'm the protector, right? They all kind of have their own little relationships. Sebastian is very much wired to take care of other people and always wanted a bunch of siblings. And so he stepped into the exact situation he had described and then formed really strong relationships with each of the kids individually, but also collectively. They're a little pod that goes around together and sometimes it's 5 against 2 of us. And
We're definitely outnumbered.
Yeah, they troll us with
But
all
it's
their new
fun.
words, all their little high school slang that we're not allowed to use, even though some of it's just refurbished that we used when we were kids. But it is funny watching them kind of be their own little. And one of the interesting things is that when I think back on things, I have to think very carefully whether or not Sebastian was there, because I don't remember really much of a before. I know there was a before
Same.
Sebastian time, but I'll think of something. I'll be like, oh yeah, remember when we? And then you're like, oh man, that was like 4 years before we even met Sebastian. But I will think that he was there.
Same.
So that's frequent. So we didn't end up getting that 25,000. And then what it ended up doing was, we had one afternoon of just being like pretty pissed off. We're like, what the heck? This made this way harder for us. And like, how are we going to come up with $50,000 in 7 months? We had no money set aside for it. And then at the end of that half day, we were like, okay. This is going to force us to build an army of people supporting our family and supporting Sebastian. It's going to...
We got to get real vulnerable and real humble.
Yeah, we got to share the story.
Yeah.
We got to tell them we just simply don't have enough money to pay all the lawyers' fees, to pay all of the immigration fees. We don't have that much money because we were not expecting to be doing that this year, right? So think about it. We started 2018 with 4 children, no pregnancy during the year, no desire to have another kid, to advocate
No
to
plan
the
to
family, no
expand our
plan to
family,
expand the
yeah.
family, no trajectory that could even end up there. Like we were like, that was not on the radar.
The opportunity kind of just fell into our laps.
Yep. And then it went from a text to 3 days later, I'm doing all the paperwork to launch this plan, to like, holy crap, how do we put this money together? And just to bringing him home 7 months later.
Yeah.
It was, to come up with 50 grand was almost impossible.
Yeah.
So the cool thing was, we got a lot of help from people, and a lot of it was in the form of gifts, $7 gifts, and from all over the world. People started asking like, how can we help? Once the video went viral, people started trying to find us. And so then we had a GoFundMe page made for us, and people started donating on there. And then even GoFundMe donated, like the organization GoFundMe donated $1,000 to our adoption. So one of the things I would say to everybody is just a quote of what every family said to me beforehand. They said, yeah, when you're looking at that amount of money you got to put together, it's overwhelming. But it has a way of happening.
Yeah.
It just does. People that you totally wouldn't expect, like that family that gave us $4,000, they just show up for you because they believe what you believe, that every child deserves to have a family and deserves to have an opportunity. And many people are realistic with their own experience and their own situation and circumstances, saying like, hey, I'm not saying never, but I am saying not now. And so if it's not now, can I still participate in helping widows and orphans and those who are less fortunate? And then when you find a friend who is going through it, it's like, oh, this is how I can participate today.
Yeah.
And so that's one of our biggest encouragements is if you're out there and you're like, man, I would love to adopt, and then you start thinking through all the reasons why it's not a good reason or a good time for you, those are real and valid, and listen to those, right? Don't get into a situation that you're not ready for, that the timing isn't right. And don't just take big risks that, if everything goes perfectly, this is going to be perfect. You have to be ready for it not to go well, and you're still all in, right? So ask yourself, if the connection doesn't happen right away, am I still all in? Because we have friends who went through the same experience as us with the hosting and then adopting, and the connection with the child took a lot longer before they were called mom and dad, a lot longer before they were told that they were loved. So you have to decide, like, I am going to do this even if I don't get what I think I should be getting from the kid or from the experience. And so if you're not ready to go forward no matter what and be all in to show up for that kid, because they're going to test you. And that was one of the conversations I had with Sebastian when he was about 13, 14, is I said, hey, I want you to know a lot of the study we did before the adoption, that right now, as you go into adolescence, you start to push and try to figure out where are the actual boundaries. What I mean is, like, where is the line where love ends? Because I've experienced it before. These kids are speaking from experience. They've experienced relationships that were supposed to be full of love that weren't. And so how bad can I mess up and you still love me? How far can I go? How much of a normal kid can I be? How much do I have to be on my best behavior to keep your love? Can I mess up? And so there's a natural tendency as you enter adolescence to start to like figure out who I am as an adult and how do I still be a part of the family but distinguish myself as an individual. And that with an adopted child and an adoptive family can feel a lot more intense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it can start to take on the form of like what I said, how hard can I push? How far can I push and still be loved? And so I sat down with them and in words appropriate for a 13, 14-year-old, I said, hey, I just want you to know all the studying we did said that right now we're kind of entering a time where you're going to have these desires to push and kind of see, you know, where are the boundaries? Where does the love end? And I said, I'm going to go ahead and give you the cheat code right now. There is no end. And so your mom and I are going to love you no matter what. That's forever. That's our commitment to you. If you want to test for yourself, you can. But just know that your mom and I are going to be laughing about it after you go to bed every night and be like, oh, he's just testing. We're going to laugh because we're going to win. We're going to win the test. Like we're going to come out 100%. We're going to get all the stars. We're going to show up for you no matter what. So you can crash our car on purpose. You can light our back shed on fire. You can let the pet out. You can leave the garage door open. You can do all the little things to test and see how much you can mess up and still be loved. And the answer is like as many as you want. Or when you feel that way, you can just come to me and you can just say like, Dad, I need you to tell me you love me. Or Dad, how much do you love me? Or do you love me forever? You can tell me stuff. And guess what? I'm going to say it for the rest of your life, whether you ask for it or not. But in a moment where you need it and you need clarity about it, you can ask or you can test.
Mm-hmm.
And I will always tell and I will always show whether you are testing me or not.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need a reassurance in a certain particular moment, then you can ask for it. I said, but you're also 13, 14 years old. If you want to test, if you want to push the buttons, if you want to do it, you can do that as well. I'm a fully grown adult. I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But we will be chuckling because we know exactly what's going on, right?
Yeah, and something that I just want to shine a light on is like, this is our experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, not every experience is like ours. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're sharing our lived experience. We are on Facebook groups, older child adoption, Colombia adoptions, like different groups where we hear stories that you just
Very
wouldn't
different.
even-
Yeah.
So, we know that that it's a spectrum and that families are dealing with a lot and that not every single experience is like ours. And I'm so thankful for our experience. And
We've had hard stuff too. I would just say like some of the stuff that was hard didn't get way harder because we were so proactive about talking about everything and just presenting ourselves as available for hard conversations and willing to start hard conversations and see where they went. And you know this, there are times we'd sit in his bedroom for like 3-4 hours and we would cover 3 minutes of dialogue total in like 3-4 hours because we knew there was something he needed to talk about. And so we'd sit there and I would try to ask in different ways. I would ask in English and in Spanish. I would try to distract him with just stories or something and then lead back into like the thing that seemed to trigger where we are now. And like, what are we talking about? What is going on? We tried to remain very curious. We would come with answers when we felt like there was an opportunity to share insight that we've learned as people that have lived more years and have hopefully had more opportunity to grow and develop as people. And so we would share things with them, but we remained very curious. And we also were really quick with the reminder that when you're a child, a lot of your actions and behaviors are influenced by the people that are around you who you are biologically wired to follow, and they are wired to care for you, take care of you, protect you, right? And so you went through lived experiences that didn't reinforce that and created a lot of confusion and turmoil and conflict within things that should have been reasonably expected as far as your guidance growing up. And so when you're telling me a story where you were off the track and where you were not making good choices, I look back at like, but who was teaching you? But who was modeling for you? But who was guiding you? Who was caring for you? And so there are a lot of experiences early on where we sat through things where he wanted to share what his life had been like, and he wasn't always proud of his life. He didn't always want people to know about parts of his life. And we were able to just keep reinforcing like, hey, things that happen to you don't define who you are. They're just things that happen to you. Who you are is the choices you make coming out of that, right? And so we told them, you're not responsible for any things that happen to you as a child. Like none of those things were your fault. And so we over and over again, don't take that on. That's not an indication of your value. But who you become is a result of the choices that you make moving forward, and you are responsible for those. And so we talk about consequences, we talk about all that stuff, but it was really helpful in our experience that he felt like there was a soft landing place to talk about the past, where I don't believe we've ever judged anything from his past or come across in a judgmental way that you could simply because of lack of understanding or experience, right? It was really helpful that I grew up in the neighboring country to him. I grew up in South America. I grew up in the middle of a civil war. I grew up in the middle of all kinds of like conflict related stuff that a lot of kids who look like me don't grow up experiencing. I remember we were walking down the street one time and the kids were talking about fireworks. And one of the kids mentioned something about how he thought something was a gunshot, smoke from a gun. And Sebastian was like, "Oh no, smoke from a gun smells different." And so I like switched into Spanish. I was like, "¿De qué estamos hablando?" Because none of the kids spoke Spanish. And then he just went and told me this really hard story from his childhood about a gun. And I was able, my mind and my heart were like racing the whole time, but I was able to be there for him as a landing place for that story so he could release that. And then he mentioned, he's like, "Yeah, I cried a lot that day." And I was like, that's a very normal response for a child. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a healthy response, right? And just reinforcing, what I'd said, that, crying is okay, being emotional is okay, being hurt is okay, expressing that you're hurt is okay. I think there's some disadvantages for some families that haven't come through a background that you and I have had when it comes to adopting a child from a developing country. Your past experience generationally definitely set you up to be more receptive and capable of receiving some hard stories because your family went through a lot of hard stories, right? And then me as well. Like I went through things that a lot of people my age who look like me would categorize as hard. And so when he was sharing those stories, I think both of us were able to be really a soft landing space for that. So that'd be my biggest encouragement, people. It's like you can't control the experience during the adoption or post-adoption. You can't control the previous life that child had. It's a very real life. It's their whole history. And for Sebastian, it's his story that we let him share. So we don't share anything specific about his life or his stories because that is his story, right? I think if families go into it with that approach of like, hey, this is now our story, but any details from the past is the child's to share or not share. And some of them are going to want to share everything and some of them want to share nothing, right? They just want to move past it and move into now and fully enjoy what this is, right? And so for the families going through different versions than what we experience, I think some of the underlying themes are still the same of how you can best support that new child coming in. It's just like being a really receptive landing place for those stories, just listening. I think we read something about not getting too emotional, but I actually have no problem with the adoptive family, like hearing some of these stories and getting emotional and crying about them and stuff, right? Like I don't think it was negative any of the times Sebastian saw me feel emotional or you feel emotional about some of the things that he told us about his past. I mean, what do you think? Agreed? Okay, let's see. Last two things. First, how has adoption changed our family?
I think that adoption has only changed our family for the better. I think that for our biological children, going through that experience changed them in a way that we can't replicate. Like we couldn't have taught them. It was a way for them to expand their minds and their hearts. And they learned about a new culture. They learned empathy. They learned so many things. So I saw their growth as humans going through that experience. And obviously, Sebastian has his own story, and he can tell his story of how adoption changed his life. But for us, as a collective family, I think it turned a page in our book. It was a whole new chapter in our family dynamic. Like we became the Barkey family Super 7, right?
Yeah.
Like before that, we were a regular family. And I feel like it gave us a superpower, it supercharged us, So we have just had a really beautiful experience going through foster, hosting, adopting, and just overall, it's just been amazing.
Yeah, I would say our kids always got along well. They're close in age. And the temperament of our firstborn really helped. He was very chill. And you often want to be like your oldest siblings, especially younger years. The younger kids just want to be like big brother. And so having an older brother who just kind of rolled with it and was like super chill, it did make them all be a little more chill. Bringing Sebastian in added a layer of gratitude for what otherwise would have been just typical or mundane or quote unquote normal, right? Because all of a sudden it wasn't normal for what was normal for them was not what every kid had. They were like, though we talked about the shock of them finding out that Sebastian didn't have parents to teach him how to swim. It was like, why not? It just never crossed their mind. Even though this kid's coming, like in what world does a family just send a kid off to a different continent? See ya, no check-ins, no phone calls. They just never piece it together until there was an event talking about a swim experience, right? And so I think what it did for our kids is it opened up the world. We're not Orange County, California people. We're not from the orange bubble. We have this much broader worldview simply because of our experiences, not because we're people that are wired to think better than other people. We're not. We just have experienced different, right? And so that different has given us more experiences outside of this area. And so what is the real world? Well, the real world is what you have experienced. Like that's what's real to you. And so what's real to us is so much more than here. And now they had a story that was so much more than here, right? And they had a brother who had a totally different childhood. And that was totally different from theirs. And all of a sudden the reality hit them that like what they have, parents who love and support them, siblings who are their biggest fans, like that's not everybody gets that. And so they became more appreciative and more grateful of stuff, which was awesome. We talked to them a lot about that. We talk about being kind. How do we show up well for others? And they started thinking about that, right? Like, because they processed how unfair it was that Sebastian had this early life experience. Like that wasn't fair. But then also partnering that to, but he didn't do anything wrong. So he didn't do anything wrong, but had a completely unfair experience. Well, every kid talks about things being unfair. It's not fair. I have to do the dishes. Like it just changed all of that for them, right? At a very young age. And then I want to put a lot of credit on them as little humans, way beyond their years. They processed all of this. They were huge advocates for bringing Sebastian into the family when they thought their parents were out to lunch and just didn't put two and two together, couldn't figure it out. They were coming and they were trying to help us understand that we needed to bring Sebastian to our home. And so I think that whole experience, the way it played out, it changed the trajectory of our family. I know our family got way closer because the things that we take for granted, we take them for granted because we kind of feel like, A, it's always going to be here, and B, everybody gets this, right? So we just kind of take it for granted. But then finding out that not everybody gets what they had, it made them appreciate it a lot more. So for me, that's what I think some of the biggest changes were. And then tell me a tiny bit about the video that we're going to show at the end here.
Well, so the video that we talked about in this episode is the video that went viral, and we'd like to share it with our listeners and our viewers. So we're going to the end of this podcast episode.
And if you tear up a little bit, you're one of hundreds of millions of people.
You might want to grab a box of tissues because many comments were, is someone cutting onions in here?
Yeah.
So,
man, you just made me cry in front of all my coworkers.
Right.
Now I got to share the video with them. So like we said, it's okay to cry. But it was a beautiful experience. We're so grateful that we captured the moment with the intention of sharing with our family to encourage them, but then how cool that it just went bonkers. And then every once in a while it goes big again, has a resurgence, something big happens, and then it goes nuts again. Usually when there's some kind of tragedy, then all of a sudden that video goes viral again. So if you see it in the wild, tag us and tell us. Yeah, we love it when people are like, I just saw this video, and send us a link, because we don't see the links. And if you see an article where we're interviewed, we were not interviewed. Those quotes were pulled off of something, a Facebook post or something. So we love being told where things are, so we can go and read the articles, and then sometimes we just get into the comments and we can answer questions that people have. So
and then just to wrap up where Sebastian is today, he is a thriving 17-year-old. He loves playing lacrosse. He hasn't learned how to drive yet. We're working on that.
He's in the process right now.
But he's a great kid. He's a good student.
He loves to surf. He's a good big brother.
Likes playing video games. Yeah, he's thriving. So, he's one of our greatest gifts in this life. And so we're just so thankful for this experience, and hopefully something that we shared resonated with somebody. I hope this was valuable information and an encouraging, inspiring story.
Awesome. Let's watch that video. Love you.
Love you.